Firstly, thank you very much for joining us. I was hoping you could introduce yourselves.
I'm Dr Erica Mallery-Blythe.
And I'm Brian Stein, Chair of the Radiation Research Trust in the UK.
Well, I was hoping you could tell us a bit more about the research that's recently been done. There's often a lot of health sort of debates and the effects on this.
Yeah, so this year the National Toxicology Programme, based in the USA, did the largest study ever conducted looking at mobile phone radiation and its effects on rats. And what they found was clear evidence of cancer or carcinogenicity. And they particularly found a type of cancer called a schwannoma in the hearts of these animals. And this was really important because we found a very similar cell type, the acoustic neuroma, in humans who'd used cell phones for long periods of time. And we were seeing these benign tumours in humans, but these were the same cell type that converted to cancer in the animals who were exposed. Now, of course, the animals weren't using the devices up to their ear, which explains why it was in their heart rather than in their brain close to the ear. And some people criticised the study and said, well, the intensities were quite high. Now, actually, they were totally allowable intensities of radiation that you would potentially experience whilst you use your mobile phone. So it was a very important study. But it was also closely followed up by the Ramazzini Institute in Italy, who are similar, very gold standard methodology group, who published a study looking at mobile phone base station radiation and its effect on rats. And that was at much lower intensities, but they found the same tumour types in multiple organs, actually. And the other type of tumour that we're seeing is glioma, which is a brain cell tumour. And in heavy cell phone users, this is found to be increased. It's unfortunately a very virulent or aggressive tumour that the 5-year survival is extremely poor. It is considered incurable at this point. So this is really important research. It tells us that this radiation carries a serious risk of cancer and an action really needs to be taken.
So, is it only cancer that's a health risk, or are there other problems as well?
It's not only cancer. That is one end point of very many. This kind of radiation causes something called oxidative stress. So it's damaging the cell and causing degeneration in multiple different cell types, leading to multiple different biological systems being affected and therefore lots of disease endpoints. And to mention only a few, it's things like ADHD, autism, dementias in the elderly, infertility, immune system damage. There's a very, very long list. And one new emerging condition that's also linked is something called electromagnetic hypersensitivity, which is a condition where people can have quite rapid onset symptoms, things like headaches, dizziness, insomnia, heart palpitations, mood disturbance, in response to being exposed to this kind of radiation.
So we don't always seem to be aware of this, and why is it sort of still being used everywhere?
Well, everybody's in love with their mobile phones, so it's very difficult to get people off them. It's very difficult to get our children off them. And we have to look a little bit more carefully at the politics of this, because the truth is there's an awful lot of industries and the government making an awful lot of money out of this. The government shortly will be trying to sell off the 5G licenses, and that will probably net them 12-15 billion pounds, having sold off the 4, the 3, the 2G. Getting similar numbers of money, so it's very difficult for them to put their hand up and say, I'm sorry, we shouldn't be having the 5G because we should be withdrawing it when they lose that amount of money. But also, there's quite a serious conflict of interest for the people that are telling us that it's safe. The government have a conflict of interest because of the money and the economy. The newspapers that we read have a conflict of interest because half of all the advertising revenue these days comes from the mobile phone industry. So which newspaper is going to champion the cause of it causes cancer, when they might actually lose an awful lot of their revenue? That's very, very difficult. And likewise, we actually see that one of the advocates in the UK, Cancer Research in the UK, its major sponsor is the mobile phone industry. So again, it's very difficult for them to speak up and say that, oh yes, all this research is true. And you'll hear them saying very frequently, there is no research proving a problem. That is simply not true.
Are other countries doing anything about this?
Other countries are doing significant amounts in this area. And, all these countries still have difficulties because a lot of their economy, likewise, is dependent on wireless. But they're starting to take notice of the research. But most importantly, they're actually having a debate in those countries about the research and about what it means. And as a result of having that debate, the governments are actually starting to take action. So across the population now of the planet, half the planet is now protected against microwaves significantly more than the UK. They've decided to ignore the ICNIRP guidelines, the International Commission for Non-Ionising Radiation, or the people that the UK adheres to their actual levels that they allow in the UK. And those levels are now redundant, and half the world is now ignoring them and has introduced safety levels that are significantly lower than the ICNIRP guidelines to try and protect their population. What we're also seeing now is some prosecutions in other countries. So people who have become electrically sensitive or got tumours have successfully sued and got some compensation in countries that have reduced their exposure levels. And we're also seeing in some countries that they're taking positive action in terms of where people can site mobile phone base stations away from schools and away from hospitals, and not allowing wireless in the schools, the kindergartens and junior schools and now infant schools, because they recognise that those children are vulnerable groups and they should be protected by these levels, and significantly lower levels in those countries. They still want to protect their young people because they are vulnerable. In the UK, not only do we do nothing, most of the people who have these conflicts of interest are still saying that there's no evidence of harm. This is not true. Simply not true.
So is the risk the same for everybody, or could it affect some more than others?
We know that there are some particularly vulnerable groups, and one of those would be children. They've got thinner skulls and they've got high water contents in their brain, a bit like tomatoes in a microwave. You know, some things get much hotter because they're very efficient at absorbing this kind of radiation. But in addition to that, they've obviously got developing systems, their neurological system, their reproductive system, their immune system, and they have a higher amount of stem cells which are exquisitely sensitive to this kind of radiation. In addition to all of that, of course, because they're exposed now in utero from the moment of conception in many cases, they have a longer time ahead of them for some of the latent effects to manifest. We know that this is unfolding very much in a similar way to asbestos and tobacco and X-rays, in that some of the effects like cancer can probably take several decades to manifest. But when you've exposed a child from the moment of conception, that's still going to hit that child in the prime of their life. So they're less able to outlive the effects, let's put it that way. In addition to that, I've already mentioned people with electromagnetic hypersensitivity. They're people who are showing symptoms right here, right now. And an important question is, are the headaches that these people are experiencing, for example, does that translate to a higher risk of the brain tumours that we're seeing? And we don't know the answer to that. That particular area of research is massively underfunded, but it's a very important question. In addition to that, the elderly are more vulnerable. People who have comorbidity or other illnesses that saturate their repair mechanisms or impair their immune function, they're more vulnerable. People with metalwork in their bodies that could intensify the radiation. People with higher than average radiation because of occupational exposure and things. There's a really long group and a long list of people. And to be honest, if I interviewed everyone, they'd probably fall into one group or another. So it's something we have to take seriously for everybody.
So is there anything we can do to protect ourselves a bit more?
Yeah, there's lots of things that we can do. First of all, is we need to open up the debate. We need to recognise that microwaves damage our DNA and speed up the aging process, and that is now affecting our longevity. So people are now living shorter lives, getting cancer and senile dementia. The government needs to do things by taking wireless away from schools. They need to take masks away from schools and from hospitals. And we as individuals can do an awful lot ourselves. We can hardwire our computers. We can hardwire our phones in our houses. We can ensure that we don't put our mobile phones to our heads. And those things will significantly help individuals and help the vulnerable groups. But it won't solve the problem, because certainly the research is showing that relatively low levels of microwaves are causing us damage. So we've got to face up to that. And it might mean, by recognizing that this is causing us a problem, we can then start to look at new technologies that aren't as invasive, that aren't as damaging to ourselves. But we'll never start to look for new technologies whilst we're making enormous amounts of money out of this technology, and we don't admit that it causes us cancer, health problems, senile dementia, etc. So it's facing up to the research, taking individual action ourselves, and calling upon our government and the World Health Organization to admit this problem and start forcing people to take action to reduce microwaves in our environment.
So where can our listeners find out more information on this?
Well, there's a number of websites that people can go to, and one of them is the Radiation Research Trust.org website that will give people some of the research and things that they can do themselves. There's the firemedical.org website, which tries to educate doctors and how to deal with people that are coming to them with some of these issues. And there's the Environmental Health Trust website, which covers both research and things that you can do yourselves to mitigate the damage caused by microwaves. So there's plenty of information out there if you know where it is and want to look at it. And sadly, the government, having been asked by the European Parliament to disseminate information to the populations about the dangers of EMFs, the UK government has chosen not to do that. So you've got to do it yourselves. You've got to start looking for information. When you do, you'll be horrified. And you need to try and get your children off this technology, because not only is it becoming addictive, but it's actually damaging their physical health and will give them cancer.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time out to talk to us today.
Thank you very much for your time.